In the late 1992, Hollywood was preparing to launch one of the most groundbreaking sequels of all time, The Matrix Reloaded. The Wachowskis wanted the world's most respected martial artists to bring authenticity and elegance to their digital universe. And so, they approached Jet Li, the man who had already conquered Asia, dazzled audiences with Romeo Must Die, and earned the title of China's wushu prodigy. The role they offered him was Seraph, the mysterious guardian angel of the Matrix. For any actor, it was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. For Jet Li, it could have cemented his place in Hollywood forever. But what happened next stunned the industry. Jet Li refused. He walked away from millions of dollars, global exposure, and a role that would become iconic. His reason? A single clause in the contract that no one else dared to challenge. The producers wanted more than just his performance. They wanted ownership of his very body, his moves, his life's work. They planned to digitally record, replicate, and store every one of his martial arts techniques, creating a virtual library of Jet Li's fighting style that studios could use long after he was gone. For Jet Li, this wasn't just a business decision, it was a violation. Those movements weren't just choreography. They were the result of decades of sacrifice, discipline, and spiritual dedication. If he agreed, he feared he would lose not just his art, but his very identity. And so he made a choice that would shock the world. He turned his back on the Matrix. It was a decision that raised uncomfortable questions. In an age where technology could replicate everything, from faces to voices, what truly belonged to the artist? Was Jet Li protecting his legacy? Or was he sacrificing the chance to leave an even bigger mark on history? But the truth behind his refusal is much darker and far more personal. Jet Li was not born into privilege, nor did he grow up with the certainty that he would one day become an international icon. Born Li Lianji in Beijing in 1963, his earliest memories were marked by loss. His father died when he was just 2 years old, leaving his mother to raise 5 children alone in a China still reeling from political upheaval and poverty. It was a childhood defined not by abundance, but by survival. For young Li, the idea of strength was not an abstract concept, it was a necessity. At the age of 8, his life took an unexpected turn. During a summer school program, teachers noticed his unusual agility and recommended him for wushu training, a rigorous form of Chinese martial arts that combined athletic discipline with philosophical roots. Wushu was not simply about fighting. It was about balance, respect, and embodying the spirit of centuries of tradition. Jet Li poured himself into the practice, training day and night with an intensity that separated him from other children. By the time he was 11, he was already representing Beijing in national competitions. The world began to see what China had discovered, a boy who moved with the precision of a blade and the grace of a dancer. At just 12, Jet Li won his first national championship. Over the next 5 years, he would become a 5-time all-China wushu champion, defeating opponents often twice his size and age. To his country, he was no longer just a child, he was a symbol of Chinese strength and pride. But beyond the medals and acclaim, what wushu instilled in him was something far deeper. The belief that each movement carried a piece of the self. Unlike acting, which could be learned and imitated, wushu demanded authenticity. A punch was not just a punch, it was a reflection of the years of sweat, the sleepless nights, the sacrifices no one else could see. To Jet Li, every technique he performed was an extension of his soul. This philosophy shaped the man he would become. While others dreamed of fame and wealth, Jet Li's earliest goal was simply to honor the art he had inherited. He once recalled, "Wushu gave me everything. It gave me discipline, purpose, and a way to express myself without words." To him, martial arts were never just about combat. They were about preserving identity, history, and integrity. This foundation would follow him into the world of cinema. At the age of 17, he was chosen to star in Shaolin Temple, a film that not only launched his career but ignited a new wave of martial arts cinema in China. Overnight, Jet Li went from national champion to movie star. Yet even as fame grew, he remained grounded in the lessons of his youth, the belief that his movements belonged to him alone. That childhood of poverty and discipline built a man unwilling to surrender what he considered sacred. It was the very same conviction, forged in the training halls of Beijing, that decades later would lead him to make a decision Hollywood could never understand. Because for Jet Li, Losing his moves was not just losing choreography, it was losing the only thing that had ever truly been his. And as he stepped into the global spotlight, Hollywood would soon learn that this quiet, disciplined martial artist was more than just another action star. He was a man who refused to let his soul be bought. By the early 1982nd, Jet Li was no longer just a martial arts prodigy, he was a national treasure. His debut in Shaolin Temple, 1982, electrified audiences across China, transforming the ancient monastery into a tourist destination overnight and launching a new wave of martial arts cinema. Jet Li's screen presence was different from anything before him. Unlike Bruce Lee's raw ferocity or Jackie Chan's comedic acrobatics, Jet Li embodied discipline, calm precision, and an almost spiritual elegance. Every movement he made on screen carried the weight of centuries of tradition, yet felt effortless and new. Throughout the 1982nd and 1992nd, he dominated Chinese cinema with films like Once Upon a Time in China, where he portrayed the legendary folk hero Wang Feiheng. In these films, Jet Li wasn't just an actor, he was a cultural ambassador, bringing Chinese identity and martial philosophy to audiences at home and abroad. His performances made him an icon across Asia, admired not only for his fighting skills but for the quiet humility he carried off screen. Hollywood eventually came calling. In 1998, he made his American debut as the villain in Lethal Weapon 4, holding his own against Mel Gibson and Danny Glover. Though he barely spoke any English at the time, Jet Li's presence was undeniable. Audiences marveled at his speed, his precision, and his ability to steal scenes without words. He was quickly offered leading roles, starring in Romeo Must Die, 2000, Kiss of the Dragon, 2001, and The One, 2001. For the first time, a Chinese martial arts star was headlining major Hollywood productions, not as a sidekick or exotic villain, but as the central hero. Behind the scenes, however, Jet Li was cautious. He had seen how Hollywood had treated other Asian stars typecast, stereotyped, or pushed aside once the novelty wore off. He accepted roles that would expand his reach, but he remained protective of his cultural roots and the authenticity of his craft. Unlike many of his contemporaries, Jet Li didn't chase fame recklessly. Each project he chose reflected his belief that martial arts was more than entertainment. It was a form of self-expression that deserved respect. Then came the call that could have changed everything. The Wachowskis wanted him for The Matrix Reloaded. The Matrix was not just another film, it was a cultural phenomenon, redefining action cinema and introducing philosophical depth to mainstream audiences. To join its sequel would mean global immortality, placing Jet Li alongside Keanu Reeves in one of the most iconic franchises in film history. The role was Seraph, a mysterious guardian who existed within the Matrix as a protector of its secrets. It was a part designed for elegance and martial arts mastery, perfect for Jet Li. Producers were prepared to pay him millions, and the role would introduce him to a new generation of fans. On paper, it seemed like the perfect opportunity. A Chinese martial arts legend merging with Hollywood's most cutting-edge vision of the future. But behind the glamorous offer lay something far more unsettling. The Wachowskis and Warner Brothers wanted to capture not just Jet Li's performance, but his entire fighting style, digitally scanned, recorded, and owned by the studio. With motion capture technology, every punch, every kick, every subtle movement would be stored and replicated forever, usable in future films or projects without Jet Li's involvement. It was here that his journey from Beijing's training halls to Hollywood's red carpets collided with a dilemma no one else had faced. For decades, he had carried wushu not just as a skill, but as his identity, his essence. To hand over ownership of his movements to a studio was to surrender everything he had fought to protect since childhood. Jet Li now stood at a crossroads. Embrace the chance for unparalleled fame and fortune, or defend the legacy that defined him, even if it meant walking away from one of the biggest roles in film history. And when he chose, the world would be stunned. For most actors, a Hollywood contract was simple. You deliver a performance, the studio owns the footage, and you move on to the next film. But for Jet Li, the offer to play Seraph in The Matrix Reloaded came with a hidden clause that struck at the very core of who he was. The studio wanted more than his likeness. They wanted his life's work. The Wachowskis had pioneered a new kind of filmmaking with The Matrix, blending groundbreaking visual effects with martial arts choreography. For the sequels, they wanted to push the boundaries even further using motion capture technology to record Jet Li's every move. Once digitized, those movements could be replicated endlessly, applied to computer-generated characters, or even used to train future stunt doubles and actors. In other words, the studio wouldn't just own Jet Li's performance in the film, they would own Jet Li himself, his speed, his grace, his unique expressions of wushu. The artistry he had spent decades perfecting, from cold training halls in Beijing to the grand stages of Hollywood, would become nothing more than a commodity in a digital database. For Jet Li, this wasn't just a legal technicality. It was a profound betrayal of what martial arts meant. Wushu was not choreography that could be bought and sold. It was a living expression of his soul, his culture, his discipline. He feared that once he gave away those movements, he would no longer be their master. A computer could replicate them endlessly, stripping them of the sacrifice and spirit that made them authentic. He later recalled in an interview with Chinese media, "They wanted to record and own my kung fu. If I agreed, then one day they wouldn't need me, they could just use my moves, even after I'm gone. That didn't feel right. It was like stealing my soul." It was a stunning admission. At the height of his fame, Jet Li chose principle over power. He walked away from The Matrix Reloaded, leaving the role of Seraph to another actor, Colin Cho. Fans around the world were shocked. Why would a man turn down such an opportunity? For many, it seemed unthinkable. But Jet Li's silence at the time only deepened the mystery, leaving whispers of conflict between the star and Hollywood's most powerful studios. The cost of his decision was heavy. While The Matrix Reloaded and Revolutions went on to earn over $1 billion, Jet Li's Hollywood career slowly lost momentum. Without the massive global exposure that The Matrix could have given him, he remained respected but never ascended to the same level of worldwide fame as Jackie Chan or Bruce Lee. In some ways, he became an outsider in Hollywood, admired but also underestimated. The industry that could have immortalized him instead moved forward without him. New stars emerged, while Jet Li chose smaller projects and occasionally returned to Chinese cinema. Yet behind the scenes, he carried no regret. For Jet Li, the decision had always been bigger than a movie. It was about protecting the sanctity of his craft from a future where technology threatened to erase the human spirit behind the art. But the choice also revealed a darker truth. Hollywood's hunger for ownership, for profit, for control often came at the expense of the very artists it celebrated. Jet Li has seen that machine up close, and he had refused to become just another piece of intellectual property. Still, the consequences haunted him. Fans who never knew the full story assumed he had been overlooked or passed over. Studios began to see him as difficult or unwilling to adapt, and as the years went on, Jet Li's physical health began to decline, further limiting his ability to perform the art he had fought so hard to protect. The tragedy was clear. By defending his identity, Jet Li preserved his soul, but he also sacrificed the chance to leave an even larger imprint on global cinema. It was a battle between legacy and loss, and no one emerged completely victorious. And yet, the darkest chapter of Jet Li's journey was not only about a lost role, it was also about the personal struggles that would push him to the brink, testing whether even a legend could withstand the weight of his own choices. By the early 2002, Jet Li had already lived several lifetimes. He was the child prodigy who became a national champion, the cultural icon who revived Chinese martial arts cinema, and the international star who crossed over into Hollywood. Yet beneath the polished surface, the physical and emotional toll of his journey was beginning to show. Years of intense training had left his body battered. Behind the breathtaking kicks and flawless spins were torn ligaments, spinal injuries, and chronic pain. Unlike Hollywood's computer-generated heroes, Jet Li's performances were real. Every strike and leap carried the weight of decades of sacrifice. By the time he was in his 42nd, his body was already breaking down. Then came an even greater blow. In 2010, Jet Li revealed that he had been diagnosed with hyperthyroidism, a condition that accelerates metabolism and causes fatigue, weight loss, and muscle weakness. For a martial artist whose craft depended on control and precision, the disease was devastating. His once iron body betrayed him. Fans who saw him appear frail in public were shocked. The man who had seemed invincible on screen now struggled simply to walk without pain. In interviews, Jet Li spoke candidly about his mortality. He admitted he had been told by doctors that without proper care, his heart could give out at any time. He confessed to moments of fear, even despair, as he faced the reality that his career and perhaps his life might be cut short. And yet, the cruelest irony was that his suffering only highlighted the decision he had made years earlier with The Matrix. By refusing to give Hollywood ownership of his movements, Jet Li had ensured that his art would die with him. Unlike other actors who left behind digitized legacies, Jet Li's martial arts would never be fully captured, never endlessly reproduced. His wushu, born from his body and spirit, would fade as his body weakened. This was the paradox of his legacy. The very choice that had preserved his integrity also sealed his fragility. He would not be immortalized as Seraph in one of the most iconic film franchises of all time. He would not see his movements digitized into eternity. Instead, he would face the inevitable decline of a human body, carrying his art into silence with him. The tragedy extended beyond health. Jet Li struggled with the burden of fame itself. He admitted feeling like a puppet of his success, bound to the expectations of millions while privately yearning for peace. After the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami, which he narrowly survived while vacationing in the Maldives with his daughter, Jet Li's perspective shifted dramatically. Witnessing death on such a massive scale and nearly losing his own child left him questioning everything. He later said, "When you see life and death so close, fame and money become meaningless. You realize the only thing that matters is the spirit." In the years that followed, Jet Li withdrew more and more from the spotlight. He focused on philanthropy, creating the One Foundation to provide disaster relief and humanitarian aid. His roles became fewer, his appearances rarer. Fans speculated, rumors swirled, and when images of him looking frail surfaced online in 2018, many feared the worst. Here was the man who once embodied invincibility, now fragile, mortal, vulnerable. A legend who had turned down immortality through digital replication, only to face the ultimate truth. No one, not even Jet Li, could escape time. It was the climax of his story. A sobering reminder that the greatest battles are not fought on screen or in contracts, but within the body and soul of the person behind the legend. And yet, even in this tragedy, Jet Li's choices carried a profound lesson. Because while his health declined and his career slowed, his refusal to surrender his art had ensured something priceless: authenticity. His moves, his spirit, his legacy remained his alone. Untouched, unbought, unbroken, the world mourned what might have been. But for Jet Li, the story was never about what he lost. It was about what he refused to let go of. Today, Jet Li's name carries a weight far beyond box office numbers or red carpet appearances. To millions, he remains one of the greatest martial artists to ever step onto the screen, a man who bridged East and West while never abandoning the roots that defined him. But his true legacy lies not in the roles he played, but in the choices he made. By refusing The Matrix Reloaded, Jet Li drew a line in the sand between art and exploitation. He reminded the world that movements are not just pixels to be captured, but stories written on the body through years of sacrifice and discipline. In an age where technology can clone voices, faces, and even entire performances, his decision feels more urgent than ever, a declaration that identity cannot be owned even by Hollywood. His later years have been marked by humility and service. Through the One Foundation, Jet Li has channeled his fame into philanthropy, helping victims of natural disasters and raising awareness for mental health and compassion. For a man once celebrated for his physical strength, his greatest contribution may now be the quiet strength of his example. And perhaps that is the final truth. Jet Li did not need the Matrix to become immortal. He became timeless because he remained human, fragile, principled, unwilling to compromise the soul of his art. Behind the dazzling choreography and the global fame, Jet Li's story is a reminder that every legend pays a price. And his price was one only a true master could afford: sacrificing Hollywood immortality to preserve the authenticity of his own spirit.